All right, so good afternoon and welcome back to the Collision Hub latest webinar with AirPro Diagnostics. We've got Eric and Josh and Chuck back with us, as well as a couple of new guests this week. We've got Jason Buck and Michael Bradshaw joining us as well, so I'll let those guys introduce themselves in just a moment. So appreciate everybody's time today, especially AirPro Diagnostics for again sponsoring this. It's now become a bi-weekly webinar. We really appreciate it, and we got a lot of big other things in the works that we're looking forward to do some additional shooting with them, do some more live stuff as well in June. A little more details on that. Hopefully at the end of today's session. And speaking of today, at the end of today's session, I want to. I'll mention it at the end in case I forget. We do have a survey today. We've got a post-webinar survey I'd like you to follow up on. When you end the meeting, you should see a link to the Survey Monkey survey that's there. Just a handful of short questions, was it informative, what did you learn kind of stuff, while you're looking for more information, et cetera, that we can share back with AirPro Diagnostics and hopefully provide some content to you in the future that you're looking for, and have them follow up with you if there's something that you have specific questions on for that. So again, appreciate AirPro Diagnostics and your time today. Guys, let's start. I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself, and then I know Chuck's got one slide he wants to start before we get way into it. But on my screen, I've got Eric, Buck, Josh, Chuck, and Michael. So let's start with you, Eric. Why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you got going on?
Yeah, welcome, and thanks for taking the time again, Jason. Thanks for having us. Eric Newell, Vice President, Business Development and Field Operations. And glad to be here. Very excited about this conversation, and because I think implementing the process is, quite honestly, the most important part. So excited.
Buck.
Hi, Jason Zeise. Everybody calls me Buck. Lamettry's Collision up in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area of Minnesota. Was trained as a mechanic. I've worked basically in one way, shape, or form my entire career as a collision mechanic, and right now I'm in charge of our mechanical department for our all of our body shops, and also running a calibration shop.
Very good. Josh, go ahead.
Josh McFarland with AirPro Diagnostics, Vice President of Strategic Business Operations. Been with the organization a little, coming up on a year now, and been around the industry on the mechanical side and the collision repair side for, I guess, just over 25 years now. So happy to be here. Looking forward to the dialogue. Really enjoying these sessions with Collision Hub, and excited to have some fresh meat. Fresh faces on this one with Michael and Buck.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Chuck Olson, the Senior Vice President of Automotive Technology here at AirPro Diagnostics. I've been with the company shortly after launch for going on 4 years now. My background's all been in the mechanical side, diagnostics, troubleshooting with a lot of support for collision centers after the repair, solving those problems. I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, see how much I can learn about the processes in the body shop. All you guys have left way more footprints in body shops than I have.
And last but certainly not least, Michael.
Michael Bradshaw. I'm the Vice President of K&M Collision. I've been here for 14 years. I was actually 7 years old when Josh got into the industry, so I haven't been around quite as long as some of the rest of you guys. But I think what I lack in experience, I make up for in personality.
There you go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, again, thanks everybody for being here again, and certainly to all of our attendees as well. Thanks for joining in. If you've got questions throughout the day, throughout the presentation, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, or the Q&A. We can do it either way, whichever one you want. So before we get into it, I am going to share a slide here that Chuck has sent to me, or Eric sent to me. I'm sorry, Eric put together. And Chuck, if you can see it, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so I wanted to recap a little bit over the last couple of sessions that we had. We've covered a few things. I think many people have been on them as well. but just going to kind of go over the what and why and this roadmap for ADAS ready. So what doing pre-scans and doing diagnostics has always been important, but the ADAS systems has really upped the importance of doing these kind of things. So we went over, what is a scan for retrieving trouble codes at the beginning and why we're doing it, and to ID the systems and look for the trouble areas that that need attention. And then, so the pre-scan is really the discovery. And then we get into a few things that you guys may have heard me talk about before. There's a couple articles out there on it as well. But then we get into strategy-based diagnostics, component-level scanning, and all the data that's beyond the trouble codes. So those things all need to be executed. And then, all for the reason and the why for the repair plan and the improvement of the repair plan. And then, of course, we've got, on the post-scan side and what it is that needs to be done and the tools that we need to do it. And so now we need to execute everything that was identified in the repair plan and from the discovery. And for ID, with IDing the systems that need attention, the calibration requirements that are going to be done, whether they're minor calibrations. A lot of these calibrations have existed before ADAS, but are very important for ADAS systems to function properly as we get to the end of the repair. And of course, tools needed. There's quite an array of tools that are needed. And I'm going to kind of repeat some of the things I said before, that you get to the end of the repair, clearing the codes, you're not fixing anything unless you address all of these other areas that we have on. And we created this roadmap for ADAS ready, and we've got another term for ADAS capable that we'll go over in some future sessions that we have planned. But these are the main points. That's what we hear from a lot of shops that come aware of the ADAS, want to get involved in the ADAS, but they're not ready to get there yet, whether they're going to be subletting or bringing it in-house. So you've got to acquire capable scan tools or remote scan services that have the capability of reading and identifying the systems. And then the very important part is the technical expertise and education of the management and staff of why we're doing these things. And the other important part, access to the service information and the repair procedures, and to become competent at pre and post scanning. And then also competent identifying all of the calibrations that are going to affect the ADAS system, but isn't necessarily an ADAS calibration that we think of today, like placing targets and those types of things, or what you set off. Once you get through these steps, now you are ADAS ready. And at that point, what I mean by ADAS ready, that you've identified all these things so that now you can either send a car out for an ADAS calibration, you've identified if it needs an ADAS calibration, or if you're going to go into the next steps of acquiring the tools, space requirement, things that you need to become ADAS capable. Like I said, we'll go over more in the future. So this is kind of the what and the why, and I'm going to turn it over to these gentlemen to go over more of the process, the SOPs in the shop of how you actually get this done and how to fit it into your process and what they've been through. So I'm just going to sit back and see what I can learn.
All right, cool. Thanks, Chuck. All right, so let me just gonna pull some up here. Throw that down. All right, so again, we're going to be talking today about incorporating collision repair diagnostics into your workflow process on our way to ADAS ready. So I've got a few questions here, and again, if you have questions, please feel free to chime in via the chat or the Q&A one more time. So first, Buck, first things first, who should be doing these scans?
Well, the short answer is you should have your collision diagnostic expert performing those scans. Now, there's a couple of routes to going that. What the process we've done, we have invested in a mechanical department, and got 28 mechanics. We do all of the scanning on all of our collision vehicles. We've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in tooling and equipment and training. We have separate mechanical locations. So we've actually have separate buildings, including this calibration center, that we've invested in order to incorporate all of this for ourselves. So, we use our own internal experts, collision diagnostic experts, to perform the scans. There are your other options, maybe your local service dealer, your service department. But I always like to think, are they the experts? I mean, that service department, they are excellent. They're experts at selling cars, maintenance, warranty work, flashing transmission shift code issues. But are they collision experts when it comes to running a diagnostic scan or understanding or interpreting that data? So that leads you to, if you don't have that service department that's that expert, and you haven't gotten to it, or you're not planning on it, you don't have the space or the time to set up your own in-house experts, that's where remote diagnostics can become your best friend very, very quickly. Using those experts to run those scans, run those diagnostics, interpret those codes, they're experts at it. They see this all day. They're not looking at a repair shop, they're looking at lean and rich codes, or they're looking at misfire codes. Well, I never see those in a collision car. I'm seeing 10, 15, 35 codes that are collision related. And that's where you want to make sure that you have an expert for what you're doing, scanning that vehicle. And that's either in-house, you have to have that expert, or remote diagnostics.
Did you say 10, 15, 35 codes?
85 codes. I mean, right. It depends on the vehicle, the damage. There are plenty of vehicles that we get that 85 codes would be no problem. Yeah.
And still people think scanning isn't necessary. So let's figure that out.
Right.
Nonetheless. Hey, Michael, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have went a much different route. We have relied really for probably the last 4 or 5 years on remote diagnostic companies, such as AirPro, to perform these scans. And, before the evolution of all the remote diagnostic capabilities, we were relying on the dealerships. And to Buck's point, we ran into quite a few issues where the dealership just didn't understand what they needed to be looking for, how to interpret some of that data. And it just created problems not only for us, but for the customers as well. And in our sense, it made more financial sense to do it remotely, with the exclusion of a few manufacturers where we have, really heavy volume. We will do that in-house, but I would say probably 85% of our scanning diagnostics is being done remotely currently.
Hey, Michael, I've got a question for you, being that you are integrating remote into your process. Who in your shop is actually hooking up and you mentioned AirPro, the AirPro device, and submitting that scan? Who's actually doing it?
We have an individual that we've got a pre-check-in process in which we do a multitude of things to document vehicle condition, do a pre-alignment check on the vehicle, and after the pre-alignment check is complete, that individual is responsible for submitting all the requests to AirPro. And we like to do it up front. That way we have the report back, and as the vehicle's being disassembled and blueprinted, both the tech and the damage assessor can go over that scan information to identify any issues with maybe any modules or sensors that may need to be replaced or diagnosed further as part of that blueprinting process.
Awesome. And Buck, your actual technicians who are performing the scan and operating the tool are the ones within your facility. I know in our conversations yesterday, you had mentioned that they're actually side by side with the disassembly technician and process to see those parts come off the vehicle and the actual collision. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about how that helps, having eyes on the vehicle while going through that process.
Yeah. So our technicians that are performing the scans, they're right there at the vehicle with your blueprinter, with your repair plan manager, with the body technician, with the painter, so that we can have a full understanding. We can look at the codes, we can look at the data that we pulled, we can and look at the vehicle and address, questions, concerns, items like that. And When we use remote diagnostics, such as an AirPro, you want to make, what we've done in the past, we made sure that we have, maybe we don't have that expert there, but we have somebody that is fully capable of and understanding that repair plan. They're there at that vehicle. If there's any questions back and forth, that can be answered by your blueprinter, your repair plan manager, when it comes to looking at the data and looking at the vehicle.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, just
Hey, Buck, I've got one more question for you. So think when you think about the who, right? Who's doing this? And obviously you're doing all of this internally. You've got 28, I think you said, mechanical techs spread out across a number of locations and that sort of thing. Depending on the make and model of the vehicle, do you sometimes pick and choose who is going to interact with that vehicle and use the tool and the software?
Yeah, so we try and cross-train all of our guys as much as we can, but we do have experts in certain areas. I mean, probably our best Audi technician, Volkswagen Audi, is here at the calibration center. I've got Tesla technicians, and they're the only ones that are doing these, doing a Tesla. So we do separate out those brands a little bit. We've got some factory Honda software, and we've got our Honda guys doing those at our certified shops. So we do break it up to specialize in it, but we do an immense amount of cross training because, in today's world, that's what it takes.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, kind of continue along, I think, the lines of the blueprinting. I think it's, it's vital to have that done up front to really develop a solid repair plan. Otherwise, I don't think you can do it, a solid repair plan. So, Michael, what part of that process and, when should that pre-scan be? I mean, where are you performing those pre-scans? At what point?
That would probably be the third thing we do when the vehicle comes in, and it would go in order of basically documenting, damage, prior condition, pre-washing and degreasing the vehicle. Then it moves right to pre-scan diagnostics. So before we physically touch the vehicle, remove anything from the vehicle, really, it's being pre-scanned.
Why is that important?
Well, because you don't want to alter anything on the vehicle. You don't want to disconnect modules. You don't want to disconnect lamps. You don't want to have things unplugged that's going to throw codes on the vehicle when they're scanning it and give the person on the other end, especially in a remote situation, the idea that maybe there's more wrong with the vehicle than there actually is. So what we found is you leave everything intact, then they can identify what codes are open on the vehicle. And it just helps them go through their diagnostic tree and process.
Does that help from a customer standpoint as well? I mean, you've never had a customer come back and say, my car never did that before their accident, right? So does that help with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, and again, it's something when we really started scanning, implementation, there is a learning curve there because you're going to have vehicles. If you're a shop that's not done this before, there are going to be some cars that for whatever reason come in and somebody forgets that it hadn't been scanned yet. And now it's halfway apart. Oh my gosh, we forgot to scan it. So, it's really important to make sure that everybody in the facility knows to look for that report. And that's what we found. We started putting on our SOP checklist, and now everyone knows to look for it before they touch the vehicle. If that's not been signed off on, then they go back and verify, hey, has this been done? Did you just forget to sign off on it, or do we need to make sure this gets done? And so that was one of the big things for us, is really having a solid process that was outlined that the technicians were responsible for checking off, as they went. And so now the individual responsible for the scans, he checks it off on every one. He initials beside of it. When the blueprinter gets the vehicle and the tech receives the vehicle, it's a visual indicator for them that it's been complete, and they know, hey, I can start work on this vehicle because that part of the process has been complete.
Buck, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think Michael's answers are, it's really well thought out there. And yeah, for remote diagnostics, doing that right away makes a lot of sense. We do things a little bit differently though. We bring that vehicle in, do your pre-wash, we we don't perform our pre-repair scan till much further in the process. So we're going to get that vehicle completely torn down with our body technician, our blueprinter. We're going to have the paint technician involved in that blueprint as well. And after both body and paint blueprint is done, that's when the mechanical side is going to come in and perform our mechanical blueprint / pre-scan. It's still a pre-repair scan. We haven't started repairing this vehicle, but what we're looking for is for we want to capture all of that data, all of those codes that are going to be related to the repair. We've seen plenty of large jobs come in, and maybe all you have is a headlight code because the headlight's broken. But by the time you get done fully disassembling this vehicle, you've unplugged the front radar and you've unplugged all of these other components. Maybe the painter comes in and he decides that in order to paint the apron or something, he's going to want a wiring harness disconnected and rolled back. So I want to be able to capture all of those codes, all those communication codes, so I can investigate those, because that's going to be part of my repair plan, that mechanical side of looking up all of the procedures, initializations, calibrations, all of those things are going to need to be done at the end of the job. I'm going to identify them all up front by having all that disassembly data.
So say a little bit more about that, Buck, if you won't mind. So you're blueprinting the vehicle, and you recognize you've got something that you're disconnecting that from history may have a calibration or some type of aiming procedure, some type of initialization procedure. Is it at that point that you research that so you can build it as part of your repair plan? Do you flag it for later? What's your process for that?
Yeah, no, once we run our scan, we document their scan with photos, we save the data to PDF, we attach the file, full standard SOP for how we proceed with that. And at that point, it may not be right there because I may be out in a parking lot or the other end of the shop doing these scans, but as soon as available, we're going to go back and research those fault codes, their descriptions, and what may be required in order to properly not just clear the code, but actually fix the problem at the end of the repair. I don't know, just for an example, you could disconnect a wiring harness, and all of a sudden now you've got modules in the front of the car no longer communicating with each other, and it will set codes for those communication faults. Sometimes things like a steering angle sensor may need to be reinitialized or 0 point just from those two modules losing the communication with each other. So I want to identify that up front, not at the end of my repair when I'm doing my post scan. I want it up front.
Hey guys, we got a question coming in for Buck and Michael. Who is responsible in your facilities for looking up the repair procedures?
So in our facility, it's going to be the blueprinter. So the blueprinter is going to look up those procedures, really along with the technician, because they're going over the vehicle together. But any major procedures, any initializations that are required after disconnect, calibration that's going to be needed, after the fact, all of that stuff, the blueprinter is going to look up on the front end. That's going to be saved to the file for the tech to easily access. But also every tech in our facility has their own tablet. So if they're in the midst of a disassembly process and there's a procedure that hadn't been looked up yet, they can pull it up right on their tablet, instantaneously and look at it right then. So it's kind of a combination of the blueprinter and the technician, but I would say the vast majority of those procedures that we're really docking the file for, such as calibrations or major structural repairs, anything like that, those are all looked at by the blueprinter to develop the repair plan and also placed in the file. And then the technician, he'll reference them from the file, but also may reference them from his tablet directly from the OEM information site. Because as you're aware, there are a lot of manufacturers that are really good with their hyperlinks. So if you've got, their site pulled up, you can, expand the tree and go boom, 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 and it's really easy. And then there are some other manufacturers where you got 4 or 5, couple 100-page PDFs that you're flipping back and forth through. So really it depends on the manufacturer if they're going to pull it out of the file or they're going to go straight to the source and just pull it up on their tablet.
What about you, Buck?
Yeah, I think you're probably referring to some of those Audi Volkswagen 400 or 500 page PDFs. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yes. Procedure lookup can be difficult. And, you know, looking up the code definitions, that's one thing. Understanding them and then finding those related procedures, a whole different deal. Our blueprinter does all of the procedure lookup and documentation with the repair technician while they're blueprinting the car. And the mechanical side, we look up all those procedures and document it for mechanical related items. So scan related items, procedures that are going to be required because of the data that we found in a scan, calibrations. So, you know, mechanical side, we'll be looking that up. So often, you know, just for front bumper fascia removal, is going to require a front radar calibration. We're going to pick up that code. We made, you know, our windshield camera will likely have a code saying it's lost communication with the front distance sensor. That's indicating to us that that module's, you know, disconnected, it's off the vehicle. We're going to need to require a calibration. So we'll have to look up the procedure for bumper fascia R&I, because that's where you're going to find the information that indicates to you that the need for the calibration. And then we will also document the actual calibration procedure.
And, you know, you brought up some great points, and we talked about it last time a little bit, but I don't think we can overemphasize it. It's not just hooking the scan tool up and pushing a button and you're done. That's the easy part, right? I mean, I could do that, right? But to go into no comment, Josh. Thanks. I can see you can work that. But actually, you know, finding the procedure, chasing that down, thinking about all that, and then building that repair plan. That takes a lot more time than just, again, plugging it in and pushing a button.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, Jason. And I do want to hit, before we move on to the next question, is there were two very different parts of the process that the pre-scan was being done. And I would caution those, if you don't have the investment and the people and the diagnostician directly at the vehicle, like Buck does, who has the ability to differentiate accident-related codes to what we call the repair footprint codes, ensure that you're getting that pre-scan done as Michael is prior to disassembling the vehicle. So I think those are two very key points and great parts of the process. But Buck, you're lucky. You have that guy at the car that can make those decisions and differentiate between the two. If you don't have that luxury, make sure you get that pre-scan done before disassembling any part of the vehicle. That way the diagnostician doesn't get confused with the two codes.
Absolutely agree.
So sticking along with the theme of process and SOPs, what are you doing from a post-scan standpoint, and when are you doing that?
Post-scan. So we're doing our post-scan after the vehicle is completely reassembled, but prior to a final wash. That's when we're going to perform our post-scan. We want the vehicle fully assembled. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing a scan mid-repair. I mean, let's be honest about that. That's a very valuable thing as well. But our post-scan for our final clear, fully assembled vehicle, can't have anything else disconnected. Sometimes on, even simple things like a fog lamp being disconnected, it may just cause issues. It could be just a simple fog lamp code, but you want to have everything plugged in so that you're not like, well, it's just a fog lamp, that'll go away on its own. We don't want to ever assume that, because that's when you have problems with cars. Fully assembled, so you can get a good, clean bill of health on that vehicle when you're done scanning it. You don't want to have that car out washed in the done row when you run your post scan. That's always the time that you will find, one of the park sensors is disconnected. And now you got to bring the vehicle back in. And of course, it's going to be something you can't reach or access. You got to take the bumper back, not in the done row. This thing needs to be before pre-wash.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to your point about the park sensor issue, kind of before liners and underbody shields are put back on, it's kind of what we've found. If you can get everything put back together except that, and there are going to be some times through the process where you're replacing some headlamps or modules that need to be coded, and so that might not be a post scan per se, but we're going to, you know, be hooking up the scan tool at some point in the process before it's complete for that. And really, you know, to speak to exactly what Buck said, you know, we kind of, once you get the vehicle reassembled, where everything's plugged back up and there may be some trim or something that it's not attached to the vehicle yet, so you still have access in case it's needed. That is when we would do the post scan. And kind of to elaborate on that too a little bit, you know, in the past, if a vehicle needed a calibration that we identified and that calibration was going to be performed at the dealer, we may not post scan that vehicle. We may have relied on the dealer to post scan it. And what we found is that just created a lot of issues. So what we do, even if it's going to the dealer and they're going to have their scan tool hooked up to do calibration work, we make sure that every module, other than maybe those that need to be calibrated, are functioning properly. There's no communication issues anywhere else. And that way, when it goes to the dealer, we know there's a very small set of issues that they're going to be correcting. And the other thing that I would kind of tack on to that, kind of tying back in the procedure, we started quite some time ago printing the physical calibration procedures from the repair information and providing those to the dealer along with basically a checklist for them to sign off that they had done it that way and provide pictures of the targets being set up. Because I can, you know, tell you, anybody that's on this webinar right now, if you're relying on the dealership to do the calibration according to the procedure, you're probably getting it done once out of every 3 times, because most of the technicians don't really do those calibrations. They're not familiar with them. And what we found was happening were they were simply test driving the vehicle, stating that it functioned as intended, which I'm not quite sure what that means, and never really performed the calibration. So there's, you know, there's some back end work that needs to be done on the shop's part to make sure the dealer knows all the procedural steps and has the targets and equipment to do the calibration, to be quite honest.
So I got a follow-up question tied to that. Where are you incorporating the test drive, and what does a test drive mean to you? What does it entail?
So that's kind of a 2-part answer. We're going to test drive it before we take it to the dealer. If there's some ADAS systems that need to be calibrated, we understand that, you know, we're not going to test those for functionality. But what we really want to make sure is that there's no drivability issues or anything else that's going to interfere with anything once the dealer's completed what they have to complete. Because the last thing we want to happen is to take a car to the dealer, then perform a calibration, we get it back, there's some other issue that's identified during a test drive after the fact. Now we're disconnecting modules and things like that, and it may kind of negate that calibration that was performed, so to speak. So we end up really performing 2 test drives of the vehicle. One once everything's reassembled before it would go to calibration, and then a final after it's been calibrated at the dealership, or even if that's something we've done in-house, we would perform another test drive and you know, checking many of the same things in the second test drive, but now we're also checking those ADAS systems to make sure they're functioning properly as well.
All right, so we got it. We kind of went through the SOPs. We got our pre-scan. We got our repair plan. And we do our repairs, do our calibrations, post-scanning, test drive. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? So when you first implemented these processes, did that have an adverse effect on production? Did it slow it down?
I'll take that. Initially, it did slow us down a little bit. Okay, you got to get the process down. You got to get familiar with it, and you know, likely when you first start implementing this, your process is likely going to change a couple, 2-3 times before you find something that works efficiently, effectively for your facility. You know, and that. You know, because we have 10 collision shops, that process was a collaboration of processes that we had at all of our shops. to find where, our standard procedure for scanning vehicles, how we get those done. We have been scanning every vehicle that comes through our doors since the end of 2015, December of 2015, January of 16. We decided it's the right thing to do. We need to do this, and every single vehicle pre and post scan. How does it, I guess the biggest thing is after you get your process dialed in, what you're going to find is it's actually going to save you time, not cost you time. It will a little bit on the front end, but what it saves you on the back end, having that data, helping you write a full repair plan is the key. So it'll actually save you a ton of time on the back end.
Well, you, Michael.
So, early on, we were relying on the dealerships, so we were having to take cars to and from the dealer. So I would say really going with the remote capabilities kind of increase that efficiency for us. But, that is also that answer would be reliant on whom the shop may be using as a diagnostic provider, because again, response times are different for everybody. And if you're relying on one third party versus another, it may take longer, it may slow the process down. It really depends on where you're coming from to where you want to go with it, I guess is the best answer.
And I've got to believe that, there's not going to be a one size fits all. You really need to kind of take a look at your shop, play a little chess in your head, and really think about how you're going to implement it. So, what was the challenging part of the implementation, and what did you do to overcome that?
Biggest, well, there's multiple challenges, but just to be completely honest, it's the buy-in of your own staff. That was a big challenge at the time. We had been fixing cars basically the same way for 30 plus years. And all of a sudden, the advent of all this technology and electronics and network communication on these vehicles, it's easy to walk up to a cracked bumper, point to the crack in the bumper, and you can identify the damage. All of this diagnostics of the codes and the electronic damage, that's something that's hard, you can't see it. So it's hard to wrap your mind around it. So getting a buy-in of our own staff of the absolute need to scan every single car. It's just a small bumper job. Now, it doesn't matter. We need to scan every single vehicle so that we know that we are returning this vehicle pre-accident condition the way the OE designed it to operate after our repairs. So we took a lot of training. We do, and something is, as simple as this here, Collision Hub and AirPro putting on this webinar. This is the type of stuff that we train with our staff, both external sources. We put on training courses internally for our own file managers, our blueprinters, for our body technicians. Probably the most effective thing that we've seen was sitting down with you. If you got a blueprinter or a file manager that doesn't fully understand the importance of this, you sit down with them with that diagnostic report, and you can go through these codes and you can talk about the system, you can talk about the fault code, you can talk about the procedures required to repair these things, and that's where you can really start to enlighten and educate your own staff on the importance of this. And once you have your staff with full buy-in and they're educated, now it's easy to educate customers and insurers.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think implementation from the perspective of making the decision to perform pre-scans on everything or post-scans on everything, that's not where we really had any struggle. I think the struggle for most people is going to be, not only in the past, but especially going forward, is identifying the calibrations and the prerequisites for those calibrations. And even today, there are so many people in the industry that I think since 2012, 2013, any Audi vehicle that had blind spot, if you remove a rear bumper cover and install the same rear bumper cover, no paint work, no body work, just take it off and put it back on, you're supposed to recalibrate the blind spot monitoring system. And, I feel like just what I've seen in the industry, probably 15 to 20% of vehicles that would fall into that category of requiring that calibration for having a bumper removed and installed, it's just not done because people aren't aware of it. So, I think as a shop, you've got to make the decision to pre and post scan. It's not really a choice now today. It's a must. The tricky part is training the staff to be able to identify when the calibrations are required. And there's been some great tools and resources, come out in the industry. The iCar tool is really helpful through the RTS. But again, there's so many coverage gaps within that tool. It's to be quite honest, it is really tricky on some of these vehicles to dig down into the repair procedures and figure out, do I need to calibrate this module because we did something else? And there's not an easy button for any of it, to be quite honest.
So you've both talked a little bit about the implementation and whether or not it slowed down the process and that sort of thing. And on previous webinars, we've covered, some of the things that we felt were necessary in order to try and get these invoices, paid and that sort of thing. And I don't want to completely go down a rabbit trail, but I think there's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about it from your perspectives, because previously it was Eric and Chuck and I and Jason talking about it. I'd like your take real quick on, whether you ran into challenges there and what did you do to tackle some of those challenges for, getting the invoice paid, whether it's internal work that, internal labor in Buck's case, or working with a remote provider. In your case, Michael, what did you guys do? What kind of challenges did you face? How did you overcome them?
So I think one of the things that we've done is, I think it's okay to be reliant on a manufacturer position statement in order to educate yourself. But what we found is that it's really hard to educate a lot of carriers with a blanket position statement. And so one of the things we've done is really go into the repair manuals and, pull that pertinent information within the repair manual that outlines why you're doing this scan or why you're, having to code this or initialize this. I mean, so that to me has kind of been the biggest thing for us, is to point back to information that's not just a position statement. And some of that is because we've been scanning vehicles with regularity, probably 13, 14, so we knew that it was in the repair manuals before a lot of the industry had caught on. So we were already utilizing that information. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle is most of what I've seen is a carrier will make a denial because, well, that's just a position statement. We can't make a blanket assumption based on a position statement. And that's where the shops struggle, is translating the repair information and the why behind, the scan versus just relying on that position statement.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That position statement, it is handy, but you'll get somebody to ask you, well, that position statement is 4 years old. Is it still valid? Well, yes, it is, because the manufacturer hasn't updated it. If it was outdated, they'd update it. But you're right, the procedures. I mean, when you're repairing this vehicle, if you're looking up those procedures, it's going to tell you when you need to run a scan, when you need to run a test, when you need to verify something. So, we're very fortunate to have both on the mechanical side and the collision side, a really awesome staff that can train, can teach customers, can teach insurers, the need for those scans. We can provide them with the documentation. We can provide them with the repair procedures. We can provide them with those code definitions and explain to them why we scanned, what we found here, and why it's, what is required to repair this vehicle. So we've been real fortunate that way, but it just comes down to, having, those experts, and whether that's in-house or a remote expert, this is all we do. They look at these collision codes and identify them and can give you recommendations on how it's going to repair them. That makes getting paid easy.
Yeah. And there's a couple points here that I love that you both brought them up. Is when we talked about what challenges you face, you each had a separate different answer on what kind of challenges you saw, which was expected. But I think they both tie into one of the hardest parts of implementation. Being I'm not far removed from a body shop, is change, right? Any form of change with the technicians or the process. People don't like change typically. But through the buy-in process with your staff and the training, you guys are able to mitigate the pain points of that change. And I think if you could successfully do that, it's going to be exponentially easier for you to do that implementation. And that being said, I guess this question's more for Michael. You're using third party and remote. What would you say to someone who's on the webinar today or who's going to watch it later, and they're kind of on the fence right now about doing diagnostics, going one way or another? They don't necessarily have the money to invest, as Buck did, and they're looking at going at this alone. They're looking at getting their own tool and going at diagnostics by themselves. What would you say to someone like that?
We do some of our diagnostics in-house, and the thing that we looked at a lot were what were the aftermarket solutions available, the one-size-fit-all solutions that are out there. And what we found with all of those are there were just so many gaps, where there were modules that they couldn't touch, or information that wasn't being picked up, that we didn't feel like that was a realistic way forward. And also because of our manufacturer certifications, it made it an unrealistic way forward. So, I would think if I was starting from scratch, I would look at my vehicle make, right? What's that mix like? Am I working on a lot of Hondas, Toyotas? Do I work on a lot of Volkswagens or Audis? And, there may be some areas where it makes financial sense for a shop to invest in the manufacturer side of things, because, to be quite honest, some of these manufacturers are essentially using a laptop with a pass-through interface device and a software, and it's not as expensive as other manufacturers. And if you look at that, you can decide really easily, okay, maybe here are 2 or 3 manufacturers. We do enough of these where it makes sense for us to invest, here and there. And then maybe for the other, 80% of vehicles we repair, or 70%, it makes sense for us to have a remote diagnostic vendor, because it's just going to help give you coverage and make sure you've got somebody that's using the right tool on the other end that knows really what's going on, because it's kind of 2-part. It's not just about the equipment expense. Now you've got to train somebody in the shop on how to use it. And it may be easy on 1 or 2 manufacturers, but if you got, one person in a shop and you're trying to train them on how to operate 12 to 14 different scan tools, they may figure it out eventually, but they're certainly not going to do it with any efficiency. And at the same time, it's not going to be to the knowledge level that somebody that's doing, scan after scan after scan after scan is able to gain.
That's a great point. And Buck, you kind of alluded to that earlier.
Yep.
It's what would you say to a shop that has one guy that's going to do all makes and models and doesn't specialize in that? How challenging would that be? I'm sure you've experienced that at some point.
It would be an enormous challenge. Let's just put it that way. You would need to have you'd have to find somebody that was a real unicorn. Someone that could operate, because we've got 25 scan tools, 5 different manufacturers. I've got dozens of laptops. We have dozens of OE diagnostic software that we're running on laptops for the dozens of certification programs we have. Yeah, you can't. It's almost impossible to have one guy. That's why I have, we have a full team of mechanics that are, and we split those duties up, certain OEs with certain mechanics with certain locations. Having one person to do it all, it's going to be hard to find that person, and it's going to be very expensive to keep that person.
Yeah.
That's where the remote diagnostic, absolutely, like I said earlier, that's your new best friend.
And
there you have the experts.
Yeah. The other thing we've not really talked about is how easy it would be for somebody that didn't really understand, the ins and outs of that specific manufacturer and how their scanning system worked. You could cause a whole lot of damage to
you can break a car real fast.
Yeah. So you might have a car that drives in and it's not going to drive out. So
it has a sunroof. It has a sunroof, but the vehicle no longer thinks it has a sunroof. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Now, Michael, you talked about when you're using a third-party response times, and we talked about whether it slows. I know that you utilize the AirPro device. How have you experienced the response times just from that perspective coming from us? I know you've used a couple different platforms, but what has been your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been extremely responsive from the time that they send it in until the time somebody's on the phone, dialing into the vehicle. And there's just been a lot of communication back and forth as we're going through that scan process of what's going on with the vehicle and this and that. So from our perspective, the efficiency, and this is something that I think, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier about, slowdowns in the process from engaging in scanning practice. You're going to gain so much efficiency throughout the repair process that wasn't previously there. That's really how you get the techs to buy into it, because there are so many operations that I can think of where without the scan tool to pick up on certain things, there's, additional disassembly, reassembly on the vehicle from a tech putting it back together and something's not working. Now let's take it back apart when all that could have been identified on a pre-scan. So I think big picture, you got to make a commitment to it. It is going to take some time on the front end and the back end, but you're going to gain, a lot of efficiency through that repair process, really to kind of offset whatever you may lose on the front end or the back.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And that's why we have that 10-minute response pledge, because trying to get that, adhering to those, not slowing down the process as much as we possibly can. I know that's what we work on.
If we did have a question coming earlier, but you guys were rolling. I didn't want to break stride at all. So, but back to the test drives that we asked earlier. So, do you rely on the technician to do the test drive, or do you have somebody specific that does that?
We have our technicians do the test drive. Now, there's a couple things on test drive. So, a test drive traditionally was squeaks, rattles, steering wheel straight, vibrations, wind noises, blah, blah, blah. Test drives completely changed in today's cars. So, what we have a process, we call it a DSV, a dynamic system verification. Basically, it's an advanced test drive where we are incorporating that traditional test drive, squeaks, rattles, blah, blah, blah. But now we're going to activate all of these advanced features, all these ADAS features, and make sure that everything's working as designed. That's the only way we can verify it, because even though, say, General Motors, it's got a blind spot, you take the rear bumper on and off, they're not requiring you, if you didn't replace the blind spot modules, there's no calibration. But I want to make sure that system is working as designed before I release it back to my customer. So we are having our technicians reviewing both pre-scan, mid-scan, post-scan, and what the vehicle's equipped with, and doing that test drive.
What about you, Michael?
Yeah, so kind of same deal. Technician, and we would have a one of the blueprinters or manager, production manager, also take that test drive with them. We like to have two people in the vehicle. And the other reason too, kind of tagging on to this, is some of these manufacturers have the restraint system checks with the dynamic change of direction of the seat belts. And if you really get to reading through some of those requirements, it takes two people in the vehicle at a minimum, because you're having to check passenger safety belts as well. And if you don't have somebody in the car, you obviously can't do that. So we've just found it's good to have two people in the car, not only checking for the functions and performing some of those tests, to Buck's point, but also to have two sets of ears, listening. Some people hear things that others wouldn't, to be quite honest. So.
Yeah, and the other thing that I've heard, I think is a good idea, is not just have maybe two people in the vehicle, but even have a second vehicle, so that when you're testing that adaptive cruise control or the blind spot, it's not just some unassuming other driver going down the road next to you that they wonder what the heck what you're doing. I think it's good to have a secondary car in some situations, and I think more like the cross traffic alert, backing out of a stall. I'd rather have a peer who knows what I'm doing, being alert in case something doesn't work, rather than Ethel who ran to the grocery store to pick up some whatever. I think I just think it's a good idea maybe to have a second vehicle in a lot of those cases.
Did you just say Ethel?
Yeah, that's the first name that came off the top of my head, Aunt Ethel, for some reason. I'm not really sure what's up with that.
Okay.
All right, just checking.
So we'll be a little cautious with this one, but I'm going to try to modify the question here a little bit. Roughly how long when you're talking about these test drives, how long of a process is that taking?
I think a lot of it is it's dependent on the vehicle. Some of these vehicles we work on, it can take up to 100 miles worth of driving for certain systems to calibrate. I think Tesla is a really good example of that. So I think it's going to vary based on the vehicle, but the idea that somebody is hopping in a car and spending 5 to 10 minutes going down the road and is back at the shop in those 5 to 10 minutes is, laughable. And if you can perform a test drive in that amount of time, you're really not going through the systems and checking them as they need to be checking, and making sure everything is initialized and normalized. It's not a really specific answer, but, I would say on average 30 minutes to an hour, give or take. It could be, and it could be significantly more, just depending on what's going on with the car.
And again, I think it's important to emphasize that that's on top of, the calibration. If I'm doing a dynamic calibration, right, I still need to test drive that system after that. So it's not just one operation.
I think what's really important during the test drive, if you're wondering time or is documentation. You want to document the test drive. I always suggest doing pre-mileage and end mileage. Show that you didn't just drive it 0.2 miles around the block for your test drive. If you drove 30 miles, show that you drove 30 miles. I know there's also applications out there that will document your test drive through the process. And so that's a huge part of it. When you talk about, because I see the question in here, and I know why you reworded it. When you're worried about the time it takes to do the test drive and ensure that you're getting compensated fairly for your time, make sure you're documenting that process to ensure that you could prove you didn't go around the block and stop at McDonald's and get some food at the gas station and then head back to the shop. So documentation is key, even as in something so simplistic as a test drive.
Yeah, and just one quick point, we kind of, something we've not hit on, but another thing, if you're doing that post scan before the test drive, which I think a lot of people out there are, it's really important that you've allowed that vehicle to run and come to operating temperature at some point in that process before the post scan, because you want to allow all those systems to normalize at their correct operating range, to ensure that, you know, let's say we didn't let it come to operating temperature. We post scanned it, all the codes cleared, everything's great. We go down the road, and now as that vehicle becomes, you know, to operating range, now maybe it starts to throw a code. And so now we're all the way back into that process. So I think that's something that's really overlooked, and it's something that we've done a really good job of outlining here. And boy, we get a ton of questions about why we're doing that and why nobody else is. So, you know, I just, for those on the call, I think it's really important to understand that there are a ton of systems in the vehicle that don't normalize. You don't have certain functions happening until it is at that operating temperature. And if you don't allow that vehicle to go through that process, you could potentially have codes that are going to happen, but they haven't had the chance yet.
If I can jump on a point on that, front radars, front LiDAR. The front LiDARs are using a heating element for cold weather climates where we get some ice buildup. I have seen a vehicle where there were no codes, but the heating element was disconnected. Once the temperature went down, the ambient sensor said, oh, time to turn the heater on for the front radar. Now we have the code. So yeah, you want to make sure that, you know, you really, it's not a couple of hot laps. You need a thorough test drive to, you know, verify all these systems are working.
I think this is good because I just see Chuck there smiling because you guys are covering all the mechanical aspects of it, and he's just nodding his head and saying, yep, exactly.
We've got Bill chiming in the chat here with a great point. For the longer test drives with longer mileage requirements, the insurer needs to know why the mileage is so much higher since the accident. So I think that's a fantastic question, or a fantastic point that Bill's making, especially, you know, with probably with some of Michael's Porsches that he's working on down there. Probably be good to explain to them why it's got so many more additional miles on it, right?
See, that's why we can't have a car following the other one, because then they would just be racing, and it's nah. So
let's see here. We got another good point here coming in from Jesse. It helps to know where and which of your local roadways are ideal for what the ADAS wants to help calibration go faster. That will save a good amount of time for test drives. Yeah, certainly downtown Minneapolis, St. Paul can be a challenge versus here in Green Bay. I can do it kind of anytime I want, other than the winter time, I suppose. But so yeah, I think planning your test drives and planning your dynamic calibrations is also an important part of the process. I think, you know, we talked a lot about SOPs and processes that we've got. I think those are all good things to include in there of when to do it. We found that, you know, this time frame is better than that time frame. I think are all good things to kind of include in our SOPs overall. So,
and I think too, that's the really tricky part about trying to assign a universal time to a test drive is, you know, going back to that, you may be required to maintain a constant speed for so many miles. And to be honest, there's a lot of areas in the country where it's really hard to maintain a constant speed. And you may have to make 3 or 4 tries at getting to that constant speed for X amount of miles without a slowdown before you're actually able to do it to, you know, complete that requirement on that calibration.
Not just that, just the road conditions. I mean, you know, we have 2 seasons up here. We got winter and road construction. And I know for doing some dynamic windshield camera calibrations, yeah, there's a specific road that we can travel north on. We've got good stripes. We travel south, I can drive for hours and not get a car to calibrate. So just road stripe conditions.
Yeah.
And for those looking to document their test drive, there's a lot of apps out there. I know that a friend of mine and a lot of people on the call, you know, Frank Turlip has Test Drive Copilot. Look some of those things up because I see questions coming in here on, you know, where to put it in the estimate, how much time, how to word it. That proper documentation is going to help that portion of your question tremendously. So
I've got a follow-up question that maybe just circles back and and tackles a few different things that we've talked about today that I wanted to float out there real quick. And the question is, so what are some of the specific advantages or upsides that you've found, maybe unintended consequences even, of incorporating diagnostics into the shop? So I know you've both been doing it for a reasonable amount of time. And we've talked about challenges with implementation. We've talked about, where it fits in the process, et cetera. But what's the good news? What, I mean, there's the obvious of the car is fixed right, and you played a role in that. But what are some of the other upsides?
I think the biggest upside that we've seen is that it's almost like a self-education. I mean, you're training yourself by performing these scans, by reviewing this data. I'm getting a better understanding of not only how a system works on a car or how a network communicates on a vehicle. I'm starting to get a really good understanding of network communication on one make and model or another make and model. I'm really becoming an expert on a lot of these vehicles because I'm getting that opportunity to dig in and understand how those network communications, what that blueprint on that vehicle looks like, what that network infrastructure, and how everything operates together.
Yeah, I would say that, kind of tagging on to that, I mean, there are some improved efficiencies, obviously, in bringing it in-house versus if you're relying solely, say, on a dealership model now where you're taking everything to dealers. There's definitely increased efficiency there. But, also really to speak to, there's labor sales involved, right? So if we're transferring a significant amount of the diagnostic scanning and calibration labor outside of our company to a dealership, another company now, versus bringing it in-house, even with the assistance of remote diagnostic capabilities, you're now creating an additional labor center within your business, to make a profit from. And, so I think that's something that people need to really take a long, hard look at. It's like with anything else in this business. When we make an investment, our goal is to make a profit from that investment, and scanning, no different. When you make that investment, you need to set it up and train yourself where at the end of the day, you're going to make a profit from that investment.
Seems fair.
Well said.
All right. Any other questions from our attendees out there, either through the chat or Q&A? Anybody else got anything to add? Chuck, you got anything? It's so quiet. Just
hey, I've just been sitting and learning, but I got to say that I'm really happy to hear about the road tests, the verifications with the scan, operating the vehicles, that kind of stuff, and kind of what I started with. Clearing codes doesn't fix anything. You got to have that verification of the systems operating properly, operating that vehicle. If that doesn't happen, and I've just heard too much out from different areas in the industry. I got a scan till I cleared the codes, I'm good to go, and that just drives me crazy when I hear that. And thinking about this, with the different things, Michael had a point of the road testing before the scan, and there's actually a couple of points, and I'm kind of seeing as this evolves, especially with more ADAS, that we may end up scanning the vehicle twice on post-scan, scanning it, making sure the systems are plugged in systems so that it can pass a road test. Then after that clear, making sure that all the systems run and operate properly, and then scanning it again to make sure that we don't have a pending code that may end up flipping on before right after the customer picks up. And I was hoping to hear just one last thing from the other guys, that how much improvement have you seen in the reduction of rework by incorporating the diagnostics?
Sounds a lot like work.
That reduction in comebacks,
Yeah.
it's a huge benefit. I mean, you're able to catch this stuff. One, it's upfront. You got it in your repair plan, so you can plan for that, so you're not giving a customer false updates of when the vehicle is going to be done. You're able to verify that, yes, all these systems are repaired properly at the end of that job. To your point, Chuck, and I know we've had this conversation many times in the past, one of my favorite codes is, implausible data received. And, maybe that comes from your yaw rate sensor. Can I clear that code? Absolutely. Anybody can clear it. But did we fix anything? That implausible data received from that yaw rate sensor or an accelerometer, maybe it needs to be re-zeroed, and we're not going to have that code triggered again until the vehicle is out being driven. So yes, you have to incorporate all of this into your process so that and understand what you're doing. Just simply clearing codes doesn't fix cars.
No doubt. Anything else from anybody else, Ed?
I got one closing, I guess, talk about the next one coming up. We've done a few of these. We've talked about why remote diagnostics. We talk about what is a scan. Now we've talked about how to get it in the process. And as Chuck had alluded to earlier, we're kind of getting you down that path of being ADAS ready and ADAS capable. Our next educational series with you guys is going to be covering calibration, right? So be sure to get on that one. That's going to be a really good one. I think that's one that people are waiting on, but we couldn't get there till we talked about diagnostics and getting that portion down, because as both Michael and Buck will tell you, you can't jump into calibration if you don't have the diagnostics down first. And that being said, if you don't have the diagnostics down, we're going to share our contact information. Get a hold of us, and we could get you out something on a trial basis, and we could get that first portion done to have you ready for that ADAS conversation and tackle that portion of your repair process. So very excited for the next webinar that we are going to host and have with you, and that'll be on calibrations.
Awesome. Here, let me pull up your contact information quick here. There's Chuck, Eric, and Josh.
Thanks, Jason.
And you can, if afterwards, if you missed that, it's just jason@collisionhub.com for me. So it should be fairly easy to get a hold of me, and I can pass along any information that you, or any question you might have to this group. Guys, really appreciate it once again. Excellent seeing all of you, and Buck and Michael, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you guys since SEMA, I don't think, so it's good to see you again. Just a reminder for everybody, we will have a short survey after this. So again, when the meeting ends, you should see a link to it. My apologies to Mandy if that doesn't work. I'll take full responsibility for that. So we'll hopefully that works. What's the date of the next one, Eric? What do we got?
It's supposed to be 2 weeks from now, so
June 3rd.
I believe that's it.
June 3rd, cool. Same time, same 1 o'clock on June 3rd, and then back again on June 17th. We're going to be in Arkansas together. Josh and Eric and I are going to jump across state lines to see if we can't get arrested and get down to Benton and do some live action.
Wait, we're going to travel?
I know, that's scary.
Weird.
It is weird. So looking forward to it. So all right.
Appreciate Buck and Michael. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's been fun.
Fantastic information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right.
See you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.